So I just had a one-way flight into Cuba. Thought, you know what, I'll just wing it and figure it out when I get there. I get to the airport in Mexico and I go to take some money out. Wasn't able to take money out. The machine didn't work for me.
Oh, no.
I go through security and sit down, and I realize that, holy shit, I left my card in the ATM in the bank machine. So, and I had no money on me, you know, so I had one other card, which was a MasterCard, but my travel card, was there. So I tried to speak to the security guards and they just didn't have a bar of it. And my flight was, you know, taken off in 20 minutes. So I was like, okay, I got no money, one-way flight, no accommodation. I've got one card that I think will work over there. You know, what should I do?
Hello, I'm Alan Hill. In this podcast series of the Nostalgic Vagabond, we're talking travel, all kinds of travel, with all kinds of interesting people from all around the world. In conversation, we'll share personal anecdotes, tales of adventure, and maybe misadventure too. Listen in for some unique cultural perspectives, tips from seasoned veterans, and an array of diverse experiences that have contributed to many life-changing journeys. Travel really is a privilege. We know that now. And if we can't do it right this very moment, let's talk about it then. Hey, where are you right now? Welcome back. It's 2021. On this initial episode of the Nostalgic Vagabond podcast, Series 2, I talk with Ashley Lammle. Ashley hails from Western Australia. He has since moved to the Northern Hemisphere for career ambitions, working in heavy industry. Over the years, Ashley has travelled to many fine destinations for work and pleasure. He has developed a unique travel philosophy as he strives to become his best traveller, one who is proactive in discovering the local experience. In conversation, we discuss what is the difference between a tourist and a traveller. Ashley shares stories from his early traveller days and his somewhat Aussie cultural cliched holidays. We talk on how one evolves as a traveller and becomes proactive in discovering just in what ways one can maximise the travelling experience in any place. Ashley tells some interesting tales of good and bad experiences in Cuba, and how he has found a way to bypass the typical tourism facade and to seek out the truisms of what life is really like in a place, wherever that place may be. Anyways, let's get to the conversation. Ashley Lammle, how's it going? Thanks for coming on.
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. I'm curious, where are you right now?
So I'm in Calgary. I'm in Canada, so Calgary, Alberta. And yeah, moved over here about six and a half years ago now. So I've been calling Canada home since May of 2014.
Ah, very cool. Yeah, I actually discovered you on Instagram. I remember I don't even know how I came across all these pictures, but I just had a whole collage of pictures on my screen, and one in particular I really liked, and it reminded me of Canada. So my curiosity got to me and I clicked on it and I was like, oh yeah, it is Canada. And then it took me to your profile with all your other amazing pictures as well. And it said your name, and then underneath it said this caption: living in Calgary, originally from Australia, trying to be a traveller, not a tourist, to better understand this amazing world we live in. And I was like, oh man, I need to get to know this bloke. I really like the idea of that statement. I was actually mildly obsessed with the idea of what is a tourist and what is a traveller for a couple of years, to be honest. And I even created a character in one of my stories that was struggling with that philosophy as well. So I wanted to take the opportunity today, Ashley, to discuss this idea with you and talk about your experiences, and I can share some of my experiences and just sort of go on a journey about what is a tourist, what is a traveller, and how do we become our best traveller?
Yeah.
In your own opinion, Ashley, can you explain what you see or what you believe a traveller is or what a tourist is?
Yeah, so I think firstly, I can't take, so the tourist and traveller, there was a similar quote that I'd stumbled across from a guy that wrote cookbooks, or he was traveling the world and he was looking at different recipes around the world, and he put something along those lines together around be a traveller, not a tourist. Similar to yourself, stood out to me as well, because it's something that I would define myself as over the years through travel experiences. And the way that I interpreted that for myself was looking back at when I first started to travel earlier in my life to now, and how different that has become, purely based on learnings, based on experiences, places that I've gone to, and the people that I've met along the way. So for me, my interpretation of a tourist, when I look back at my journey traveling around to different countries, and I think about the first couple of times that I went overseas, originally from Perth, Western Australia, pretty remote part of Australia and really part of the world. So you're quite isolated and it's quite difficult to get anywhere, really. So for us, Southeast Asia is probably the quickest stop. And a lot of people from Perth and Australia in general go to, Bali and Thailand. So you do Bali, hang out there for a bit, go to Thailand, go to Bangkok. It's about 6-hour flight. Bali is about 3.5 hour flight, which is, about the same distance, probably a little bit less than it takes to get to Melbourne, and significantly cheaper, to put things in perspective for people. But for me, those first couple trips, when I look at those, it was, you're hanging out the Aussie bars, you're drinking, you're hanging out with your mates, you're coming back with a Bintang singlet or a singlet, and for you, that's exploring the world. And when I look back at that, I couldn't tell you really a lot about the Indonesian or Thai cultures. I really couldn't tell you much about the people, the customs, a lot about the language, the music, the architecture, all of those types of things, because it wasn't something that, I'd really explored when I was there. It was go over there and get drunk with your mates type of thing and come back, party. So for me, when I look back at that, I saw myself now as being more of a tourist than a traveler. And then, later on, as I started to travel a little bit more and do some travel by myself and with other people, I had different experiences. And that really, for me, opened my eyes a bit more to the world, to diversity, to different cultures and customs. I remember when I went to Columbia, booked a trip for a couple of weeks, went down there. From Canada, it's really easy. The time zone change is relatively small, and it's only a couple short flights, and, short flights for us, 5, 6 hours, 7 hours seems like nothing. For people locally, seems like a big deal. But again, coming from Perth, that's pretty short in comparison to flying from Perth to South America. It would take you, 2-3 days. So went down there, went on a walking tour through Bogota, and the lady that was doing the walking tour, we're looking at some artwork, street art, and she had mentioned this city, and she said, if you go to this location in Colombia, 50 kilometers out, there's this little village that you can go and see. Not many people know about it. There was a lot of slavery in Colombia, and there was one of the first kind of slaves that had escaped, and a bunch of them had just traveled 50 kilometers and settled. There's a river there, and they found all the nutrients and things that were able to sustain a society there. And that's what they're able to do. Not many people knew about it. They had been out there for about 200 or 300 years, and they only had just recently, the last 50 or 60 years or so, discovered them through, as the economy and the country started to expand, and they're building roads, and they stumble across this village. So for me, that was something that stood out. That's part of Colombia's history. That was something that I really was interested in exploring. And unfortunately, I was actually traveling close to there. Got a rental car, drove out along these dusty roads, pulled up in this kind of town. And this town, they still have their own language. So they do speak Spanish, but they still maintain their African heritage and customs, and language and music. So it was like about 30, 35 degrees and, quite humid. And I pull up and, some of the locals come up and they start putting cardboard boxes on the windscreen to keep the car cool. And one of the guys comes up to the window, and, there's no one else around. There's just the people that live there. And one guy could speak a little bit of English. So he was saying, would you like a tour? I can walk you around. And ended up walking me through, telling me about the history of the place, where they'd come from. I got to visit, a few houses there. I went and had lunch with his parents. They cooked me a meal, and for me, that was more of a local experience. So that's how I would distinguish being a a traveler versus a tourist.
Yeah, I like the way you've set that up. And I was thinking about this earlier today and trying to really simplify, at least in my mind, a way of explaining the idea of what is a tourist, what is a traveler. And I was trying to find a single word, but a different word, like a synonym for tourist and traveler. So I was sort of thinking, well, what does a tourist maybe do and what does a traveler maybe do? When I sort of was thinking of the word tourist, I just was thinking maybe somebody who went to Egypt but just stayed on a resort beach for 2 weeks. So that's kind of like a vacationer, maybe. So maybe a tourist and a vacationer are more closely related. And then I was thinking traveler. And that story you just described, I would say that you were in Colombia, in Bogota, you're doing a walking tour, you hear something, there's a seed planted, and you want to go on an adventure and see this place or explore this idea. And so maybe a traveler is more like an adventurer rather than a vacationer, which is more like a tourist. But then I was thinking a little bit more, and maybe it's just about your comfort zone. And what your comfort zone is depends on the individual. But if you want to push the limits of your comfort zone, does that make you a traveler? And if you're happy to stay inside and rest and luxuriate in your comfort zone, does that make you a tourist? Hence the resort beach in Egypt.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. I think what you touched on is, if you come across information, whether it's a tour that you're on, whether it's a group of people, whether it's someone that you overhear, something that you overhear someone saying, or somebody that you meet while you're over there as a local, if that triggers in you that interest to go, you know what, it's not something that's actually captured on TripAdvisor's top 10 things to do in their city, but it's something that I want to do to understand a little bit more, because it's about what motivates you to explore and understand that local culture and that location beyond what is, I think there's different things that, like you mentioned about the resort, that's something that's relaxing for people, and that's more for themselves to decompress and digest. The travel experience is more about trying to understand the location that you're in and the realities of how people actually live, because I guarantee you in those types of places where there are the resorts, that's not a true representation of the local culture, because probably the locals in some of those countries rarely, if ever, have the opportunity, other than working in some of those resorts, would actually be able to experience it for themselves. So it's not really their kind of typical way of life. And I don't think there's any right or wrong answer, but I think it's what triggers in you to say, you know what, I'm going to go a little bit out of my comfort zone, whether it is information that you've heard or whether or not it's just yourself proactively walking around and trying to meet people and talk to people. I've been to Cuba a couple of times, and the first time was an absolute disaster. And I learned a lot about myself through that trip. The second time I was a lot more prepared. The second time I went with a couple of mates from Australia. They'd flown over I actually met up with them in the States. I flew down from Canada and we went traveling through there. We wound up in Havana, Cuba on New Year's Eve. They've got this old town Havana where there's like old squares and things like that, restaurants, music playing, all those types of things. We sat down, had a couple of beers, and then we thought, you know what, let's just go wandering through the street. So that's what we did. And you don't really have to go too far before that facade of, these big, beautiful squares with their music and the nice, painted buildings and things slowly start to disappear. And then it becomes more real about the kind of conditions that people are living in. And, Cuba, it's a place where there's a lot of history there. But once you start leaving those squares, you see like the devastation in the buildings. Like they're really not well maintained. And then there's not a lot really good lighting. So we were kind of wandering around. This is like 11 o'clock at night, 10, 11 o'clock at night. The first day that we got there, we go past this one street and there's a guy sitting at the front. He couldn't speak any English, but one of my mates, he was dating a girl from Colombia who he's now married to. So he learned a little bit of Spanish. The local guy said to us, he just said beer. And we're like, yep, let's sit down and have a beer with this guy. He sees these three guys wandering down the street, and we're like, okay. So he gets up, he opens up his door, he brings out, he's sitting on this little stool, and he brings out a couple of little stools with him.
Great.
Gives us a beer each, and we're sitting on the curb with him. I think I was sitting on the curb. A couple of my mates were sitting on the stools, and we're just chatting to him. While me and one of my mates weren't chatting to him, but one of our other mates that could speak a bit of Spanish was talking to him and translating. And we just had beers with him all night. And then once it hit New Year's Eve, people started opening their windows, coming out onto the balconies, and throwing buckets of water out onto the ground, and smashing eggs and things on the ground. And that was more of a local experience for us, and we didn't know that was their local tradition for New Year's. It's about, for them, renewal and about good luck for the following year. And we ended up going back there just about every day and having more conversations with him, and meeting his daughter and meeting his wife, and then learning a little bit more about the Cuban culture through that. We wouldn't have had that experience had we not decided just to go wandering around the streets. We weren't directly looking to meet people, but if you're walking around, the chances are, and you're open to it, that you're gonna come across those types of experiences. So I think for me, one of it is the information, if you hear about something, and the other one is you go and explore proactively yourself.
And I think you made a good point about being open to the possibility of a random occurrence, or the possibility of meeting somebody and just going with the flow. There's a lot to be said in being open when traveling, and the universal thing that can bind people together when traveling is beer.
Yeah.
So I suppose if there's any advice to be given, if you can learn the word beer in multiple languages, it'll probably help you out quite a lot.
100%. Yeah. Cerveza, that's probably the only Spanish I know. You try to learn a couple words, and then, yeah, like you said, one beer, please, is typically the only 3 words that you narrow down from country to country.
Some of the first words I learn in a foreign language is, hello, thank you, one beer, please.
Yeah.
That's like your go-tos.
Yeah, 100%.
So, Ashley, you were saying earlier that I guess your initial trips abroad were to places like Bali and Thailand from your native home in Perth there in Western Australia. You've since moved to Canada. You've been exploring Cuba and Colombia, and I imagine lots of other places as well. How do you think you've evolved as a traveler? How have you changed? And were there certain events or things that had driven this change to making you into the type of traveler and the traveler that's still evolving today?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that stand out. I think for me, the biggest one is really understanding that you don't have to go too far outside of the whole hotels and the restaurant experiences before you go beyond that facade, and you really start to understand and experience local cultures in different countries. But also through those experiences, you start to appreciate how lucky you are. And really the only difference in my trajectory in life and my future has been the country that I was fortunate in being born in.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, they have the same ambitions and drives, and but that complete formula isn't there, and there's a lot of restrictions around them purely based on where they were born. The one that stands out for me was I spent a lot of time in Guinea in West Africa. So I was over there for work, and I spent about 18 months over there. And I know I was listening to the podcast that you had with one of your mates that actually had visited Guinea.
Cameron Thompson.
Yeah. So I found that one quite interesting. And he was saying, I had the same experience as him when he said you kind of fly in from France and you land in this desert in Mauritania, which is about an hour or so north. And as you're landing, it's just like desert, and all of a sudden the plane stops, people get off. You're sitting there wondering what's going on, and then the plane takes off and you go along your way. And then, so Guinea for me was a really eye-opening experience, and it was probably the first real, true traveling experience that I had. Although I was there for work and I spent a lot of time there, I'd try to make the most of it and explore local villages and local towns, and really understand and appreciate what people don't have, compared to what I had. And one thing that stands out for me was we weren't allowed to drive over there. So we had drivers, local drivers. And my manager at the time, he and I decided that, we're going to go and we'd love to see where our driver's hometown and village is. And it was about 2 hours outside the city. For them, they don't have running water. So they have wells that they basically pump from wells into buckets, and that's how they get their water supply. My manager was financing them to drill a well. So he wanted to go check it out and meet the family and all of that. So on the way out there, getting pretty close to where his village is, we passed by this school. And there's a bunch of kids just out the back kicking a deflated, old, dirty soccer ball around, like in the sand. There's no grass or anything. There's probably about 20 kids. And soccer is something that there really brings people together. It's their national sport, and it's something that they really pride themselves in. We had these soccer balls that we would hand out to the community. And I just happened to have one with me at the time that was inflated. So, we stopped the car and got out, and I kind of just dropped the soccer ball down by my feet. I could see this girl they start to see you, because you stand out, this card turns up, and then, these three white people get out, and they're like, what's going on here? And they see that we've got this soccer ball. So they start to walk over. As I kick the soccer ball over to them, they just, they start running around, cheering, going crazy, and they're kicking this new soccer ball around. Their teacher comes over and talks to our driver in the local language and says, thanks so much. We've been looking to get a new soccer ball for some time, but we haven't been able to get one. And that really stood out to me. That's something that we can go to the shops and go and pick up. It costs nothing. We can have 20 of them if we want. But for them, the little things have such a big impact. And that kind of opened my eyes a lot to, how lucky we are, but also the importance of getting outside of the resorts and getting outside of, the major cities and exploring and really understanding and appreciating the realities of and the conditions that some people live in.
Yeah, I think you've explained that what you've seen and experienced of the reality of this world and how it is on such a spectrum of equality and of wealth and of living conditions. It really puts things in perspective, I suppose is a good word. And when you see other places and you can then compare your life to other people's, you can then really appreciate all the things in your life that I guess you take for granted sometimes, and they are real blessings, because a lot of people have a lot less than us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it makes you a lot more resilient, especially in times like today. If you can compare one country to the other, if you can compare where you're from to, other countries, other cultures and customs, it really puts things into perspective. And when you have things like, okay, there may be a lockdown, you realize that you're actually living in a location where there's a lot of positives and you have a lot of opportunities, where it's going to be significantly more difficult for people that don't have that. So that just helps you, be a little bit more resilient, not only professionally, but personally, at least for myself anyway.
Going back to the premise that I mentioned at the start and your Instagram quote, if you want to call it that, how do you think travel helps you to better understand this amazing world? Have you got any specific examples that you've had on your experiences?
I think that for me, it's helped me understand people, because for me, I think it's not so much about the location, but it's the people that you meet while you're there, or it's the people that you may be traveling with while you're there. So that's a big part of it for me is the people. And I've learned a lot about people through those experiences by actively trying to meet different people if I can, and spend the time, the effort, understanding and meeting and trying to go to different locations, and just how compassionate people are, I think, as well. I went to the Bahamas with my brother last year, and we flew into Nassau from Calgary, and then we were there only for a few days, and we thought, let's head out to one of these small islands. So we flew into this island called Exuma, and we didn't know at the time that there was this one-off annual festival going on that weekend. We had no idea. So we'd booked it in advance, got there, but it meant that there was no taxis available. There's no rental cars. It was really difficult to get around. The accommodation that we booked was about 5 kilometers out of town. It was through an Airbnb. We were there for probably 4 or 5 days, I think. And the first morning, we're like, we got about a 5K walk into town. We've got no other way of getting there because there's no taxis or anything. Can't get any cars, so let's just start walking. And then we thought, let's see if we can hitchhike. We never hitchhiked before traveling, but we thought, let's give it a crack. So the first car that comes past picks us up, and yeah, where you guys going? Takes us into town. You know, through that we realize that people are very open and very kind. It doesn't matter where you're from. They're very interested in your kind of journey, but also interested in why you came there in the first place. So we end up meeting all these people. We just ended up hitchhiking the entire time all around the island for the next 5 days.
Cool.
And literally it would have been the first, if it wasn't the first car, it would have been the second car that drove past that picked us up. You know, one time we're on a school bus and this guy owned a local store, and he's like, and we're like, you know, we're trying to get to this north side of the island. And he's like, okay, he was the store owner and as well as a local school bus driver. So he was like, okay, come back at this time. I'm going to go pick all the kids up from school. No, he said, I'm going to drop all the kids off to school. So come here, and it goes in that direction. So we're like, okay. So we go there, jump on this school bus, and the school bus is going to all these houses, and all these kids are like jumping on the bus, and we're just sitting at the back, and they're staring at us like, what are these two clowns doing, you know? And then so he just keeps driving along until he gets to this road, stops, and he's like, yep, this is you just go down this, follow this path down there, and there's the beach down there, and you can kind of wander around. And that's what we did. And we just, you know, for me, that's just those experiences and memories that I have and will always think about more so than the Bintang singlet or the t-shirt that I brought that, you know, after one use or one wash, it shrunk about 3 sizes.
Yeah, that's great. I love it how, I guess, random and spontaneous events have happened and that you've embraced them and gone with the flow and just said yes. So the example you used when you were in Cuba and just drinking beers in the streets, I love that. You were there, right place, right time. Someone asked if you wanted a beer and a chat. You said, hell yes. This occasion, well, you could have walked all the way into town, but you decided, hey, why not try hitchhiking? And you got a ride, you got another ride, you met some interesting people. You spent time with them, you embraced it, you said yes. And these are some really interesting experiences that, in a way, they don't happen to most people. It's a rare thing, but it was because of your choices and your positivity and your willingness to just go with the flow that enabled these doors to be opened and for you to have this unique and memorable experience on your journey. I was just wondering, Ashley, have you got any proactive strategies that you've come up with or you've utilized in terms of being proactive and trying to meet local people? Have you gone to a place, for example, where you don't know anyone, but you've tried to meet local people through something?
Yeah. So, I mean, in the beginning, I would just go to a bar, you know, and have a chat to people, you know, and just be like, how you going, you know, and because you stand out, because you sound different to people locally, it's really easy to meet people, you know, and they're usually quite open, receptive to a conversation. So that was my first strategy. Or as well as doing that, the other thing that I've found is through fitness and through running. Like running is this universal sport that you don't need a lot of equipment for. You know, it's something that a lot of people have passion in. And there's a lot of different running groups, probably in every city, most cities around the world, there'll be in some shape or form a running group. And so I've done that a few times where I've, through like Facebook groups, I'll take a look if I'm going to a certain place and I'll start searching for run groups. And I was in, dog's just jumping up on me. I was in, I've done that a few times. So I was in Manila last year and I did that, synced up with a run group there. We had a workout and then through that you start meeting some people and then like, you know what, let's go out here, let's do this on the weekend. I was in the States and I did it there. I was in Austin and beginning of this year in Vegas, was able to spend some time with a run group, and they're people that I'm still in touch with today. So they're experiences that I had where, you know, these people end up becoming long-term friends and close friends, even though you're only there for a week and you come back to wherever you're going to, wherever your home is, you still stay in touch with them. So that was something that was really, I found quite helpful, especially in Canada, you know, moving over here. And it's quite difficult when you move to a new country and you don't know anybody. I found that fitness and exercise and different types of sporting groups is a really good way to meet people. So there's a local running group here, YYC Run Group. And I mean, I'm a terrible runner. Like I really struggle, but I enjoy the challenge. I get a lot out of it, and I really enjoy meeting the people. And I remember the first time that I went down to the run group here, and I just went down had headphones in, and I was expecting, it's a run, and we'll kind of socialize afterwards. But everybody's chatting to you as you're running, and it's this kind of way to meet new people. So I found that quite helpful, and you find some really, really inspiring, interesting individuals through that. So that's something that's worked for me, and it's something I think I'll continue doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a win-win situation, isn't it? Because you can keep fit whilst making new connections and getting involved in the local fitness culture of the place you're visiting. And it's really nice, man.
Yeah.
What was it like running in Vegas, though? Is it pretty hot?
So I was there in January.
Right.
So it's the cooler months, but it's still, it was like 20s, mid 20s. So that was fine. I couldn't imagine in the summer what it would be like running there. It would be terrible, but yeah, it was good. We did a really early morning run. It was like 7 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
and you're a little bit hazy eyed because you've been out. It was like a Saturday morning, so I'd been out on the Friday night, but I thought, I'm going to get up, go there and go for a run and meet some people. So, that's something that I did. I also found that if you find something that unites a country or culture, that's also an option to explore. So I spent a bit of time in China last year, and for them, I found that very difficult initially to try to meet people because of the language barrier. And quite often, you can go to places, and I think we're quite lucky where English is spoken around a lot of parts of the world. But if you're in a place or in a country or a city or a town where really not a lot of people speak English, and you can't expect them to speak English, you just have to be a little bit more creative. So when I was there, I really, really struggled. I couldn't go to a bar. I couldn't chat to anybody because, they weren't able to speak English, and I didn't know any Mandarin. So, that was quite challenging. But what is quite important to people in China is tea. That's something that is a custom that they have. It's something that they do with their family, with their friends. And when you walk around, you start to realize that there's a lot of little tea shops around where they sell tea and they make tea for people, and loose leaf tea. So I was walking around, and then I just walk into these shops or these places and sit down with them, and then they start making me tea. And these are all like family-run small businesses. And then so they're more often than not, they would have young kids, and their kids are learning English at school. So they start to teach me a little bit of Chinese, and I could, through them translate a little bit. And that was one way that I could start to meet local people, was through that. So I think there's different ways. When it's non-English speaking, it becomes more challenging, but it's not impossible. I think it's just how you kind of look to overcome that.
Yeah. My next question is kind of something that you've just brushed over, and it was going to be, have you developed your own kind of travel philosophy over the years? And what I'm getting from you, and you can correct me if I've misinterpreted, but it seems that you actually try to find some kind of commonality, whether that be through beer or tea or running or some cultural significant event or lifestyle or sport where you can network and get to meet the local people that way. Is that something that you've developed over the years, and is that something that you're going to continue to develop, and this will become your way of traveling?
I think so. It's not something I've consciously thought about. I think it's just evolved over time. I think through those experiences like the Cuba experience, or, understanding about how you can meet people through soccer or sport in Guinea, or, in some of these other countries like the Bahamas where they play cricket. There's different ways that you can meet people. And it wasn't something that I had really consciously thought about. I think I just naturally stepped into it. And then you kind of have that aha moment where you're like, you know what, this is actually working. This is something that really is a way to bring down the barriers. I do like to, if I can, learn a few words, but they're very minimal and I usually butcher them anyway. So, it's really hard to kind of use that as a way to really have a conversation. But I think that one of the things that I've noticed and picked up on in South America is that, salsa and dance is a way that they really communicate through music. And I'm terrible at dancing. Like I just have like, I can't do it at all. I remember when I was in that experience when I was in Cuba and I was with a couple of mates, we actually, on one of the days we met another local and he said, you know what, come back to my house and I'll cook you lunch. You can meet my wife and we can hang out for a bit. So that's what we did. And while he was cooking lunch and his wife was there, they were playing like music. And then she was trying to teach us salsa. And it was the most awkward experience that I've ever had because, you know, I didn't want to dance with her and my mate didn't want to, more because we're just uncoordinated when it comes to dancing, you know. So, and salsa is this like flowy kind of, now I'm happy to stand in the back of a pub and maybe shuffle my feet and rock from side to side with a beer in my hand. That's the extent of it, you know. So she's trying to teach us to dance and she's holding our shoulders and saying, stop, don't move your shoulders, all in the hips. And we just couldn't figure it out. And I think she was getting a bit frustrated in the end, but, you know, we gave it a crack. But that was one thing that I wish that if I could dance, that's another way that you could quite easily meet people and absorb yourself in the culture, particularly in places like Latin America.
Yeah, for sure. It's that Aussie man curse. We don't learn how to dance in Australia.
No.
So yeah, we look super pathetic when we go to South America or lots of Mediterranean places like Spain and that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's quite embarrassing, really.
If you can't dance, you're a nobody there. You know, it's like you can't talk to anybody, and everybody's dancing. And you're like, oh, I'll just sit down and shut up.
When you look back at your journey, Ashley, and you reflect on your traveling experiences and how you've evolved and changed from your early days in Bali and Thailand and to the places and the types of things you get up to now, what are some of the achievements that you're most proud of?
I think for me, I'm quite a methodical person. So in the beginning, when I was traveling, I would have this spreadsheet and I'd be like, okay, I'm going from point A to point B. This is the accommodation. This is the bus or the train or the rental car that I need to pick up. These are the days that I'm going to be there. And it was this really kind of structured approach. And then I realized that it's more important to just have a couple of hotspots and say, okay, this is generally what I want to do and some of the places that I want to go to, because I would start to meet people and they'd be like, hey, there's this beach or there's this town. We're going to go check it out tomorrow or next week. And then your plans just start to change. That was something that for me, just the way that my brain works was quite difficult because I like to have that structure and that plan. So that really is something that I had to work on, but I got a lot of value from. And I realized that, you know, I grew a lot through that by just booking a trip somewhere and saying, you know what, here's a couple of places I'm going to go to. It's pretty open-ended for a large part of it. I've done a little bit of research. There's some things that I want to at least achieve while I'm there, but really I'm going to make an effort to meet people and understand what I don't know, you know, what's not on TripAdvisor, what I can't research. So that for me, I think personally, I find has been quite an achievement just because of how just my makeup, you know, my makeup has always been this structure and planning and that's kind of how I approach my work. But then when I'm traveling, it's now become quite different.
I guess you were quite rigid in the types of planning that you had in the past and now have you kind of thrown that idea out the window and had to change your mindset to be more free-spirited, more spontaneous and not plan too much, because if you did, then they would just get spoiled?
Yeah, I think there's a happy medium because, you know, my first trip to Cuba was completely unplanned. I basically was in Mexico and I'd met some people in a hostel and they said, hey, have you been to Cuba? And I said, nope. I said, you know, we had a really good experience there. We recommend you go there. And they said, you know what happens is because the internet's really difficult for people to get access to there, you can't book. You know, there's things like Airbnb and hotels and stuff. It's really hard to make bookings. So what you do is you land at the airport. And once you leave the airport, there'll be local families there with booklets and they'll show you pictures of their houses and you go and stay with them. So it's like, okay, cool. That's what I'll do. So I didn't know how long I was going to be there for. And I didn't know what I was going to do after that. So I just had a one-way flight into Cuba, no accommodation. Thought, you know what, I'll just wing it and figure it out when I get there. I get to the airport in Mexico and I go to take some money out. I realized wasn't able to take money out. The machine didn't work for me.
Oh no.
I go through security and sit down, and I realized that, holy shit, I left my card in the ATM in the bank machine. So, and I had no money on me, so I had one other card, which was a MasterCard, but my travel card, was there. So I tried to speak to the security guards, and they just didn't have a bar of it. And my flight was, taken off in 20 minutes. So I was like, okay, I got no money, one-way flight, no accommodation. I've got one card that I think will work over there. What should I do? I sit down, and there's, I overhear this Aussie couple chatting. They were waiting at the front of where the boarding was, and they had a tablet with them. So because you had to pay. I didn't have internet, didn't have access. There was no Wi-Fi in that area, and you'd have to pay to use a little computer, which I didn't have any money to do. So I just asked them, do you guys mind if I use your tablet so I can check my banking account to make sure no one's taken any money out? I didn't tell them anything else. I said, yep, no worries. I checked it. It was fine. The plane starts boarding, and I was like, you know what? I'll just do it. I'll jump on the plane and see what happens. This plane was full. Just by chance, where I sat down, that Aussie couple I was on the window side, and they were the center and the aisle seats.
Oh wow!
Right next to me of this entire flight. So we just get chatting. They were from Adelaide, so we're talking on the way there, and I was just explaining to them, look, hopefully I can get some money out. I don't have accommodation or whatever. And they're like, yeah, we think we have accommodation. We're not 100% sure. We haven't really heard back from the person, but we know what the address is. So we're just trying to get out there, and we're looking to get money out when we get there as well. But they had 50 CUC, which is equivalent to $50 US. So we get to the airport. I try to take money out with my machine, and card didn't work. So now I'm stuck there in this country with no money, one-way flight, no flight out, no access to internet, no accommodation. Then they do the same, and he couldn't use his card either. So luckily he had the $50 still on him. So I'm like, and I go to leave the airport, and there's no families there standing there with booklets to offer any accommodations. The information that I got was incorrect. So I'm like, my only other option was just to sleep there the night and then try to figure it out the next day. Fortunately, that couple, they said, jump in a taxi with us. We'll see if you can stay with us. So we go back to this place. This little old lady comes out, and there's like this granny flat at the back, and they're there with some stranger. I'm like sleeping on the ground in the corner, thinking, what am I going to do? Like, I need to get out of here somehow. Figure out how to get to fly up to Canada or something was the plan. It took us a couple of days to try to get money, and we were down to like $10. Now I'm a burden on them because they're trying to support me and feed me, and we're going to banks, and we're trying to using our passports and hotels, and we couldn't get access to money.
Wow.
We're down to our last $10, and we found this really cheap place that gave us chicken and rice. So we're eating that, and there was probably a few dollars left. We're in Cuba, where it's known for its cigars and its rum and stuff like that. So he's like, he ordered a couple of drinks and a cigar. And his missus was livid because she's like, you idiot, like you've wasted the last few dollars that we have on like alcohol and cigars. And he was like, well, we'll figure something out tomorrow. Fortunately, by day 3, he was able to get access to money. Gave me some money. I could then get access to the internet. I booked a flight out of there the next day, flew up to Canada, and then transferred the money to them, and they went into South America. I'm still in touch with them today. So I think there's a fine line. Like, it's like a happy medium of having some sort of plan, but not being too structured.
Yeah, and I guess having the finances as well is obviously a big part of it, but not having access to your finances sometimes is something that is an unfortunate thing that happens to you. Isn't it funny that, you met someone at the airport and then you were on the same row as them? I mean, it's funny that when things happen that are kind of unfortunate, it always seems that there's a way out.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you've made a friendship with this couple that you still have, and you shared a crazy experience of survival and trying to get on and eat and sleep and figure out where you're at in a foreign country, and you did it together and you worked as a team. And I think those experiences can happen when traveling. At the time they might be uncomfortable and a bit annoying, but you grow from them, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And then you just, like I said, you become more resilient through those experiences, because you realize that for something to happen, you have to make it happen. So sitting there and thinking, holy shit, I've got no money. Well, I don't have access to my money. I don't have a flight out of here, no accommodation. If you didn't do anything, nobody's just going to actively go up to you and know what your story is. You have to try to make something out of it. And that was one of the experiences that I had where it just seemed to work. And like I said, it was just by chance that they were sitting next to me, and I overheard them with an Aussie accent and used their tablet, and then happened to be sitting next to them on the plane. And then we had a similar experience where they couldn't get money out either. So then it become, and then we try to battle through. So
crazy, man. That's awesome. Obviously, it's difficult to travel at the moment with COVID all over the world. But I imagine, Ashley, that your journey will continue, where you're going to keep growing and trying to become the best traveler you can be. Have you thought about particular adventures or experiences or certain challenges that you want to throw yourself into to push you further ahead in your journey as a traveler?
Yeah, I have. There's a lot of places. I mean, when I look at the world map, I generally don't look at the places that I've been to. I look at the places that I haven't been to. And when I look at that in comparison, I see that there's a large part of the world that I have not yet explored or experienced or visited. And even the places that I've been to, I could go there at different times of the year and it'll be a completely different experience as well. So I'm always looking for different locations or different places that I think for me may be interesting. Iceland's one that's on the list there. I'd love to go up there. I'd like to go into Sri Lanka. That would be really interesting. Nepal would be interesting. Even places like I went to South Korea, had the opportunity to head out there for the Winter Olympics. That was a really fun experience. And I went to the DMZ and went right to the border where North Korea is. And for me, that's quite a fascinating place, an interesting place that I would like sometime to be able to go and visit, purely because of how limited the information is that we get out of there. And for me, what I've realized over the years is we get inputs from a lot of things, from media, from TV, from movies, from friends, from whatever, about what a place is like. It's not until you actually go there that you make up your mind for yourself. And I guarantee you that people will be just like anyone else. There's still kids going to school, there's still families working, all of those types of things. So that's a place that's on the list for me at some stage. I'd like to get there. But yeah, I'm always looking for different places and try to chat to different people that are from certain countries and to understand those little hidden gems that you wouldn't otherwise have known about. But it's difficult now. And, I think one of the biggest challenges for me is that I can't travel. It's not the worst thing that could be happening right now. So I'm okay with that.
Just carry on, eh?
My favorite 4.
Ashley, what is your favorite time of day?
End of the day, sunset.
What's your favorite animal?
I'm going to say the eagle, just because I'm from Perth and the West Coast Eagles footy club. So I'll go with that.
Nice. What's your favorite site or location?
Favorite location would be in the Rocky Mountains in Canada. It's a really amazing part of the world, and it's always different whether you go there summer, autumn, winter, or spring. It's a completely different experience. I really enjoy it. Nice.
And the final one, what's your favorite ocean or sea?
I'm going to say I like the Pacific.
Nice. Yeah.
That's something that is quite difficult actually when you're living in Calgary because you're landlocked, but the ocean is, as being an Australian, is something that we brought up pretty close to. So yeah, for sure, the Pacific.
Yeah. I grew up on the Pacific Ocean for my formative years, let's say. Yeah. But you're on the Indian side in Perth, right?
I am, yeah.
There's a little bit of east-west.
So maybe I should have said the Indian.
No, you got the one right.
Let me change my answer.
Pacific. Yeah, that's your answer. That's final.
My favorite 4.
To finish off, Ashley, I wanted to talk a little bit about your photography, because I've noticed on your Instagram, you've got some really, really nice photographs. Do you have a specific interest in photography or a type of photography?
I do like landscape. I mean, it's something that for me, I'm more just amateur, more hobbyist photographer. It's something that in the last few years, it's more of a creative outlet for me. So if I go somewhere, and whether it's taking photos of people or taking photos of locations at certain times or days, I find it's a good way to really share what that location, what that place is about. And for all those photos that have a certain meaning for me, there's a certain story behind it. I recently brought my first kind of mirrorless camera last year, so I've been playing around with that. The other thing that I take with me on some trips is a drone, and I've found that that's a really good way to get some unique aerial shots. So I take that with me as well. What I'd love to do is be able to select some of the photos and have them blown up and put on my wall at my home of some of these landscape pictures, because that's, for me, when I'm at home, they all have certain meaning. There's a certain story there, and it's just reinforces what I've learned through that traveling experience. So yeah, it's just something that I enjoy doing, and where I can, I try to take a few photos and share them.
Do you keep albums, or are they all digitally on your hard drive?
I do have them digitally. So I've got quite a bunch stored. I got a lot that I took when I was in Guinea. Most countries that I've been to, I've taken a bunch of photos. So I do have them stored there, but I also get a little bit paranoid because, I've had hard drives and things crash in the past. So I have backups beyond backups, and have them sitting there stored. So yeah. Hopefully I don't lose anything. But I've got a bit of a storage of different photos and videos that I've taken along the way.
Well, Ashley Lammle, thanks for coming on the show, on the podcast. I've really appreciated your stories and your insight on your travels and your perspectives on the whole idea of traveling and becoming your best traveler. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much for having me. Enjoyed the chat.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to the Nostalgic Vagabond. I hope you enjoyed listening to our conversation. And if you would like to listen to other interesting talks on travel, there are more podcasts available. Check them out wherever you get your podcasts. And for updates, just follow me at the Nostalgic V. Don't forget, your journey is special. Own it. I've been Alan Hill. Until next time. Hey guys, if you enjoy listening to the Nostalgic Vagabond, why not support the podcast? If you haven't already, subscribe and you'll be notified when new eps drop. You can also support the podcast by leaving a rating or a review on your podcast app. Why not share this episode? Tell your friends about it if something resonated with you. Word of mouth is great promotion. If you're into social media, maybe post a screenshot of the episode or upload the link on your profile so your mates can see what interesting content you've been into lately. All your support comes straight back and helps to keep the travel content and nostalgia of this podcast going. Cheers. So don't forget to subscribe.